We're working our way through Revelation and doing so pretty quickly. Because we're working through quickly, I'm also, as we go, editing a sort of a booklet that will be available probably once we finish the series. So if you have any questions about things that we don't cover, they may just hang on until you're able to get your hands on that booklet, and you may that may answer your questions, or we can have a conversation about them. I say booklet, it's sort of starting to run into a few pages, so if you want it, you can send me an email and I'll just email it to you. But I can print it for people that would like to explore a little more. So today we have come to really the center of the book. We're in Revelation chapter 12 and 13. But I want to give you just a couple of pieces of information before we dig into it. And the first piece of information is that for you to know that in Greek, right? That's a great way to start a sermon. It gets everyone's attention, right? In Greek, the word for witness is martyr. Okay? And the word for martyr is martyr. Okay? Greek's like that. So originally, the Greek word referred to somebody in a court who was a witness. They'd seen something, and they're witnessing, serving as a witness as to what they saw. And so they were called a martyr. It didn't cost them their lives. They just went to court and shared what they had seen. Over time, after Christ, it came to mean someone who dies for their faith. Okay? And so I think as we read through Revelation, you're going to see the word witness quite a bit. But I want you to keep in mind that witness and martyr are the same word. The second piece of information that I'm just going to give you and not really explain is based on Revelation chapter 13, not just on this verse, this chapter, but we're introduced to a beast here, a mythical beast. And really what I want us to take out of this is that it's a reference to the Roman Empire, and particularly to Caesar. Okay? And so I'm not going to get into it all, but if you choose to read chapter 13 with that in mind, I think you'll see sort of references that can make sense. Do you remember, I don't know if I see it so much today, but it used to be like if there was a military coup in some nation somewhere around the world, and one of the things that you would see is great big pictures of the new leader. It might be on the side of a building, it might be, on shop fronts, it might be, but, the leader would put his picture up all over the place to let people know, I'm the leader. I don't think it's exactly the same, but one of the things that interests me about living in Greece is that when you go to a park, there'll be a sign that tells you the name of the park. And then there's another sign that tells you who the supervisor of the town is. Because, that's where you go when you're trying to remember who is the supervisor of this town. You go to a park. It works for the county executive or for the mayor in the city of Rochester, okay? And so wherever you go, there's random places that you'll just see this belongs to the city, to the town, to the county, and this is the leader. Okay, it's not the same. But in Rome, they took it a step further. Not only, they didn't have, big photographs on the sides of buildings, but they would have statues of their emperors, okay, to remind people who's the emperor, because it could change fairly quickly at times. But more than that, they would have temples to their emperor. You've heard of, Julius Caesar was the first Caesar, right? But it wasn't long until we got to Caesar Augustus. Augustus is, includes the word August or august. And it means someone who's respected, someone who's revered. And at the time of Jesus, Caesar Augustus had solidified his power, and he had declared himself the Son of God, or the Son of the gods. Okay? And so he declared that he was no longer simply a mere mortal, but that he was a deity, that he was worthy not only of respect, but also of worship. Now, if you're a pagan and you already have 254 gods, right, then is it really going to hurt you to add one more if that keeps you out of trouble? It's like, okay, if Caesar wants to be a god, I'll worship Caesar. Okay? I'll pay a little tax, to the temple. Well, in fact, we can curry favor with Caesar by building a temple to him. Okay? And when he dies, we'll just switch his statue out for the next one. Okay? Because apparently these gods die. And so there was pressure to worship Caesar, to build a temple, to go to the temple. What do you think would happen if Caesar learned that there was a temple in your city for people to worship at, but that it was in disrepair? Would Caesar be happy? And you know that old saying, if Caesar's not happy? Exactly. Okay. And so you better worship Caesar. The city would put pressure on everyone to worship, to speak kindly, to do what Caesar wants. Because the more you do that, the more money Caesar might send our way. The better off everyone will be. If you don't worship Caesar, you are a traitor. Okay? You're going to bring trouble on our city, and nobody wants that. I said that's not a problem for a pagan. What if you're a Jew? Yeah, there's no God but God. Right? God is the Lord our God, one. So that was tough for the Jews, especially as they spread out through the Roman Empire. How about for Christians? You see, the Jews had an exemption. The pagans knew that the Jews were stubborn about this. And so the Jews had an exemption. As long as they prayed for Caesar, they didn't have to pray to Caesar. But when the Jews started to say the Christians are not Jews, the Christians are some other group, and in fact, as pagans became, as non-Jews became Christians, it became more and more obvious they're not Jews. Right? And so Christians didn't have an exemption. So they were caught in a vice. Right? They were not Jews with an exemption. They were not pagans. They couldn't worship Caesar. It was a tough place to be. And so Revelation is written towards the end of the first century, probably the last book that was written in the New Testament. And the church has evolved. You know, if the church started about the year 30, then 70 years later it has spread. There are congregations all over, and Jerusalem has been destroyed 30 years prior, and these Christians are trying to do the best they can, but they are regarded as traitors to the empire. And every time something goes wrong, whether it be that it doesn't rain, whether it be that there's an attack, whether it be that Caesar has, sent for more money, more taxes, whatever it is, the Christians are easy to blame because they're not worshipping not only the other gods, but worshipping Caesar. You see, Caesar, the worship of Caesar, the Caesar cult, we'll call it, was the only one that was really enforced by the Roman army. Okay? If you didn't want to worship the local deity, so be it. But if you don't worship Caesar, the Roman army is lined up against you. So that is the situation. Rome, the government, the state, and Caesar as the head of that government are opposed to Christianity and are making life difficult for the churches and for the individual Christians. That's the situation. All right, so you got those two things in mind. This is our outline. I want us to see where we've been coming. We've got the first 3 chapters, the letters to the churches. Okay, and you can go through and look at those and see the struggles that they have. We have chapters 4 and 5 that are set in the throne room of God. As there's worship and just different people there. And then in chapters 6 through 11, there's these visions of these seals, 7 seals on a scroll that are broken, and if one is broken, then different events take place, and the same with trumpets, sort of like repetition. And so they ask this question: the martyrs, the ones who have died for their faith, are in the God's throne room under the altar, and they cry out and say, God, how long? How long is life going to be this hard? How long are people going to continue being persecuted and killed? How long is the wickedness of the world going to be tolerated? And then God responds by saying, who can stand? Okay? I've got this, right? Who's going to get in my way? Okay? And that's what he demonstrates as he brings judgment on the earth through the seals and the trumpets. So in chapters 12 and 13, we reach the center of Revelation. And we're not so much going to talk about chapter 13 today. We're going to spend our time in chapter 12. There's a break between chapter 11 and chapter 12. We shouldn't think of Revelation as just one long story. Okay? Revelation is giving us different messages. And so just as the seals and the trumpets are answering this question of how long, or posing the question, how long and who can stand, that's sort of addressed there. It's put a bow on it. You can see that in chapter 11, the seventh trumpet has sounded, and everything returns to worship. In verse 16, the 24 elders who were seated on the thrones before God fell on their faces and worshipped God, saying, "We give thanks to you." And they go on and they keep going down. And then in verse 19, then God's temple in heaven was opened, and within his temple was seen the ark of the covenant, and there came flashes of lightning, rumblings, peals of thunder, an earthquake, and a severe hailstorm. So everything has settled down after the seals and then the trumpets. God has imposed himself upon the evil of the world. Heaven is worshipping him, and then this light show, and it reaches kind of an end. Everything is wrapped up. So then in chapter 12, we get this new vision. Okay? And it's a new point. We shouldn't see it necessarily as continuous. It's as though John wants to remind people of what is at the center of their faith. Okay? That what is going on? How did we get to this situation? Why are Christians being persecuted and martyred to the extent that they are? Why is life so difficult? And so a great sign appeared in heaven. If you have your Bibles, you'll need to follow along. I don't have this on the screen. Chapter 12. And this is the great sign in heaven: a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and a crown of 12 stars on her head. So I don't want to try and break down every little bit, but I do want to just give you this picture. So this is a coin from about the late teens, so the years 10 to 20 AD. And you see there it's a goddess, the goddess Victoria. She's standing on a globe. Okay? It symbolizes not her great sense of balance, but that she's standing on the earth. Right? Notice how much bigger she is than the earth. And she's holding a wreath in one hand that's sort of like a crown, and a palm branch behind her back, it looks like, in the other one. But she's an authority figure. She's a goddess, and she demonstrates her status by standing on the earth, well, figuratively on the earth there. It's a symbol of power. And so when we look at our sign in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, a crown of 12 stars on her head, it wouldn't look exactly like this, but I think it's something like this. This was not the only coin that has, or image that has a goddess standing on a globe. So we're told that this woman, clothed with the sun, she's radiant and has the moon under her feet, a globe under her feet, and a crown of stars. So it symbolizes that this woman is powerful, that she is an authority figure. Okay? With the stars, with a sort of a crown, and you can see the comparison there. It was something they would be familiar with. So as we are introduced to this woman and to this new story, I want to suggest that Revelation 12 is a gospel story, a telling of the gospel. And John uses 4 different cultural points or touchstones to tell this story. 2 Greek stories and 2 Hebrew events. Because the churches he's writing to are a mixture of Gentiles or Greeks and Jews. And so he's using both of these to tell the story of Jesus. The first one is this myth. Myth really just means like mythology. It's a story about the gods, about Apollo. So there's a woman in Greek mythology. Her name is Leto, and she's pregnant with a child. That child is Apollo. There's in this story a red dragon named Python. Now, this particular telling of the story is Greek, but there's also an Egyptian version. There's a Babylonian version. This pregnant woman with a child being chased by a dragon or a serpent is found in multiple civilizations or cultures going back over a lot of years. So there's a red dragon named Python who pursues the woman with the goal of killing her child. In the Greek version, Zeus rescues and has Neptune protect the woman, the pregnant woman. Neptune takes her to an island, and then he causes the island to sink. And then once it's safe, he brings the island back up to the surface. The child, after the child is born, it in turn now pursues the dragon and defeats it. Okay. So if you're Greek, you know this story real well. And so John writes to the church and he says, I want to tell you about a woman who's pregnant with a child. Okay. And this woman is pursued by a dragon. An enormous red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns on its heads, okay? Again, the crowns are a power symbol. Its tail swept 1/3 of the stars out of the sky, flung them to the earth. Again, power. The dragon stood in front of the woman who was about to give birth, so that it might devour her child the moment he was born. So rather than the midwife waiting to catch the baby, the dragon is waiting to catch the baby. Because the dragon's hungry. Pretty graphic. She gave birth to a son, a male child, and then we get this quote, who will rule all the nations with an iron scepter. That's a quote from Psalm chapter 2. A messianic psalm. And so we get this telltale sign that this child is the Messiah, who'll rule the nations with a rod of iron. God, as it then goes on, says, and her child was snatched up to God to his throne. The woman fled into the wilderness to a place prepared for her by God, where she might be taken care of. And so God rescues and protects the pregnant woman, and the child, as we keep reading, is going to defeat the dragon. It's very similar, isn't it? But it's not hard to see how it fits Jesus. That the woman is the faithful Israel. Faithful Israel. And she gives birth to Jesus, to the Messiah. And when she gives birth to the Messiah, I don't know this specifically, talking about Herod, but certainly Satan attempts to destroy Jesus in those 30 years, doesn't he? But God ascends him, takes him to heaven after his, think of that as the resurrection and the ascension. And the child defeats the dragon. And so that's the first paragraph here in this central chapter, central passage of the book of Revelation. Next we have the Battle of the Giants. This is one of the letters to the seven churches. It's written to the church in Pergamum. A long time ago, archaeologists from Germany went to this region of Turkey. Went to this region of Turkey, and they brought back a lot of the things that they dug up. And that included this
altar as a whole. This is called the altar. Okay, the microphone's working now.
And so they took those reliefs, those carvings, they took them back to Germany, and this is in a museum in Berlin, and they reconstructed what they thought the altar would look like. So picture you're in the church in Pergamum. This is one of the temples in your city. But you see on this up close, let me just point over here. This is a snake here, over there. There's another bit up. There's a head of a snake. You say, why is there a snake here? It's this story of giants. And giants in the day were had the head of a man, and their feet or legs, their lower half was that of snakes. And so there's this story, again, it's really popular and told in different cultures, in different time periods, of the giants going to heaven and challenging the gods. And ultimately the gods win and the giants are kicked out of heaven. So that's the Battle of the Giants. That's the myth. That's the Greek story. And so now we come to Revelation 12, and we're starting reading in verse 7. War broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon. Dragon, serpent, snake, all sort of similar here in language. They fought against the dragon. The dragon and his angels fought back. But the dragon was not strong enough, and they lost their place in heaven. The great dragon was hurled down, that ancient serpent called the devil or Satan, who leads the whole world astray. He was hurled to earth, and his angels with him. And so we have this, again, this story that is Christianized. And this Christian version is that there's an ongoing conflict between evil and good. The evil, the war that takes place between, whether it be the dragon, the giants, and God. There's a tension there. And the dragon loses. Right? That's important to note here. Right? No matter how scary the carvings are, how scary the descriptions are, the dragon loses. The dragon cannot invade and overwhelm heaven. So let's go to the Hebrew versions, and we come first to the Exodus. Israel flees from Pharaoh in the Exodus. Remember this story, right? Moses is leading the people out of Egypt. Pharaoh, though, changes his mind and chases them. God in Exodus 19 verse 4 says that he carries Israel on eagle's wings to the desert where they are protected, to the wilderness where they're protected. And then Pharaoh sends an army to overtake them. The sea opens and swallows the army. Let's see how that is retold by John here in verses 13 and following. When the dragon saw that he had been hurled to the earth, he pursued the woman who had given birth to the male child. The woman was given the 2 wings of a great eagle, so that she might fly to the place prepared for her in the wilderness, where she would be taken care of for a time, times, and half a time, out of the serpent's reach. Then from his mouth the serpent spewed water like a river to overtake the woman and sweep her away with the torrent. But the earth helped the woman by opening its mouth and swallowing the river that the dragon had spewed out. Then the dragon was enraged at the woman and went off to wage war against the rest of her offspring, those who keep God's commands and hold fast their testimony about Jesus. So it looks something like this. The woman, now we're post-Christ, right? Christ has been born. The dragon is pursuing her. But the woman, the church, I believe she's moved from being the pregnant woman that is faithful Israel to being the faithful church. And the faithful church is given eagle's wings. They're taken to a place where they're protected in the wilderness or in the desert. The dragon sends a river. He doesn't give up. He wants to overwhelm and catch up to her and destroy the church. But in this case, not the sea opens and swallows the army, but John says the earth opens and swallows the river. The wilderness is a place of safety. It's a place of God's protection. And so one more here, very quick, and that is Eden. And we get this story of a serpent that leads Eve astray. Okay? The serpent is an old enemy. There's enmity, we're told, between the serpent and the woman, and there's enmity between the serpent and the woman's offspring. And so in Revelation 12, we see a serpent leads the whole world astray in verse 9. We see that the serpent seeks to kill the woman, and that the serpent goes off to wage war against the woman's offspring. That's us. So in these 4 movements, bringing 4 different stories together, we have this one story of the gospel. Okay? And it's a story of good news for those who are faithful to God. Okay? There's also, it's challenging because people are going to die. People are going to suffer. It is a war. And this is the message that John says at the heart of the book of Revelation. Is the gospel, right? Is that Jesus defeats the serpent. And so whatever else goes on around, the serpent will be defeated. But there's this reminder that for the churches in Asia and for the churches in New York and the churches around the globe today, that whenever we encounter hardship as a church or as an individual, whenever we encounter hardship, we can sometimes say, oh, Satan's attacking me. As though we're being picked out, right? Out of everywhere, that we're being targeted. But we're reminded that what the churches in Asia are going through is no different from what God's people went through in Egypt. Right? That the way that Pharaoh pursued them is how Caesar is going to pursue the Christians, is how other governments throughout time are going to make life difficult for the Christians. But that the serpent, the battle has already taken place. It's a spiritual battle. Paul in Ephesians says we wrestle not against principalities and powers, against of this earth, right? But against those of the spiritual realm. We wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers of the spiritual realm. But the spiritual realm, although that's where the battle takes place, that's where the battle has already been won, how does Satan attack the church? He uses the principalities and the powers of the physical realm. He uses Pharaoh. And you can think of other empires, other governments throughout time, throughout history, that have been used to make life difficult for Christians. And so in that context, the message to those who are experiencing this hardship, it says, yeah, life is hard, but not because you're special, but because you're faithful. Right? The battle has been won. The serpent has been defeated. But you will still experience hardship. The serpent, we're told in verse 17, the dragon was enraged at the woman and went off to wage war against the rest of her offspring. Jesus was faithful. Jesus died. Jesus was taken to heaven. The martyrs that we've already seen under the altar in the throne room of heaven, they were faithful, and they're at the throne room, they're in heaven. Right? And so, for those who are faithful, the serpent has missed out on devouring Jesus. But now he has gone, the dragon has gone to devour the rest of the offspring of the woman. And that is us. It says at the end, those who keep God's commands and hold fast their testimony about Jesus. Those who are faithful. Those who continue to confess Christ as their Lord and Savior. And that's the message to these churches. Not that your hardship is going to be removed, but that this battle has been won. The battle that started in Eden, that went through Egypt, that carried through Babylon, that is now at the time of writing in Rome, that has moved on to other places ever since then, that battle is an ongoing spiritual battle of the ages. And we're not going to escape unscathed. And so this is the gospel story. It's not as cute as the manger and the angels in Luke chapter 1 and 2 and 3. But it's the same story. That there's a dragon waiting for the child to be born. And there's a dragon that is waiting and watching for us. I said at the very beginning that the government, the Caesar, the empire, was the adversary. It was the threat to the church. And somehow I think that over the years that we have found ways of saying, oh, this concept of a Christian empire, right? Europe for many centuries, Europe was a Christian continent, wasn't it? Right? The government and the church were one and the same in many instances. And we thought that this was the way it should be, even at the same time of seeing the corruption and the problems with that. And I think sometimes we still fall into that of thinking that the government and the church can march in lockstep, and that a nation, an institution, can be Christian. But I think that the message that we have here is the power that Satan uses these institutions many times to accumulate power, to thwart the church, to corrupt the church, to give the church hopes that are somewhere other than Christ. And I think it's in verse 10 of chapter 12, verse 11, we're told that the victory that is won is through the blood of the Lamb and through the word of their testimony, through their witness, through their suffering. And so when we look for the kingdoms of this world to make our lives as people of God's kingdom easier, then we're placing our hope in the wrong places. God is in control. The victory has been won, that he is our King.